For me, the most important aspect of an anime, or any work of fiction, is its story. Animation and music are important, but without a decent story, they're not enough to hold the show up on their own. Similarly, and again, this is just my opinion, the most important aspect of a story is its characters. Plot, themes, and setting are all important parts of a story, but without interesting or well-developed characters, the audience will have trouble getting invested and caring about anything that happens on screen. Without proper characters, works of fiction can feel shallow and artificial, lacking heart and soul. Luckily for Fate Zero, characters are its greatest strength. The show relies heavily on the interplay among all of its main characters. Each of them has their own agenda, and how they interact with the other characters really highlights the differences among their personalities. Each master-servant pair has a different and interesting relationship, and this leads to several intriguing conversations throughout the show. The clashing of philosophies, the depth of each character, and the way their ideals and complexities are explored is the show's main strength. In just a minute, we'll take a closer look at 7 of the show's characters, and talk about why they are all particularly effective in Fate Zero's story. For now, though, I'll touch on some of the other characters. Caster and Ryunosuke were both entertaining in a twisted way and provided a great juxtaposition between all of the morally great characters and 2 individuals who were just pure evil. Irisfield's character arc is bittersweet, but mostly bitter. It was heartwarming in the sense that despite being a homunculus, she was able to live a fulfilling life through Kiritsugu's love. But it was also tragic because of the way her life was doomed from the start, and the subsequent impact that had on Kiritsugu's character. Tokiomi was an oblivious, traditionalist buffoon that was simultaneously both a decent and awful father, though mostly an awful one. Kaneth was a terrific tool that the show used to subvert the audience's expectations. This high-born, condescending, aristocratic, arrogant, and snide dick of a man illustrated the type of thinking that Waver has been working against his entire life, and he was also important in revealing more of Kiritsugu's character. I never really felt sorry for Kaneth, but the fact that I didn't cheer and celebrate this man's death, despite how despicable he was, is a testament to Fate Zero's brilliant writing. Humanity shows its true nature when someone's back is against the wall. And what did Kaneth do when his back was against the wall? He turned away from the glory, power, and prestige of the Holy Grail to protect the person he cared about. It was the tiniest possible form of redemption, but it was a form of redemption nonetheless. Anyways, moving on. Gilgamesh was great. He literally could not get more full of himself, and he did some terrible things in this series, but at the same time it's hard not to admire how interesting and well characterized he was. Assassin was a bit of a joke, and Berserker was both badass and a great representation of the awful consequences of Saber's style of leadership. The more minor characters all played their roles well and fleshed out both the world and the more prominent characters through their presence. Now I'll be taking a closer look at some of the most important and well-developed characters in Fate Zero. Lancer is one of the most important characters in Fate Zero, and also one of my personal favorites. Lancer is awesome, and even though his shocking death was one of the highlights of the show, I always dread episode 16 because of it. Lancer is the perfect example of why the setup from Season 1 was so necessary. Season 1 is all about the character moments, and the reason why nobody dies that quickly is so that the show can maintain its dramatic tension. Why kill anyone off before the audience gets a chance to know them? If Lancer's death had come earlier on in the show, we might never have gotten to know his love of knightly honor, or see him develop a friendship with Saber. His death at the hands of Kiritsugu would have been far less tragic if we hadn't had the chance to understand his ideals and how they are contrasted by Kiritsugu, as well as how easily they were manipulated by him. To very briefly sum up Lancer's past life, he was a skilled warrior that fell in love with the noble's wife and was left for dead by that noble as retribution. He then became a heroic spirit, and always regretted his lack of honor that led to his own death. In his eyes, the noble that killed him did nothing wrong, and he himself essentially dug his own grave through his actions. Lancer saw the Fourth Holy Grail War as a chance to redeem himself. All he wanted from this war was redemption for his mistakes in his past life, respect, and a chance to fight the noble fight as a chivalrous knight. This is why he's so loyal to Kaneth, despite the latter being such a dick. He's atoning for his past sins through fierce loyalty to his master. However, this becomes extremely difficult when his life as a servant starts reflecting his former life, where he made a fatal mistake. So Lau clearly becomes smitten by him, and Kenneth completely distrusts him. It's quite sad. Along with Lance's arc being full of quality writing, his death is important for the show because it displays a clear thematic message. Honor has no place in Fate Zero. This is literally spelt out in the episode title, The End of Honor. In this harsh world, the noble will suffer and only the selfish will thrive. There is no honor in war, just pain. These statements are in complete contrast with Lancer's ideals and tell the audience all about Kiritsugu, who further drives this point home in his monologue at the end. We'll talk more about him in a few minutes. At this point, Urobuchi is basically telling the audience to strap in and get ready for the show to tear their heart to shreds even further. I really wish Lancer could have had a master that respected him and appreciated his loyalty. I often think about how different things might have turned out for Lancer if he didn't have the misfortune to participate in a war that contained Kiritsugu, or if he ended up with a master that respected him, someone like Weber. Though I guess in a setting like this, that's a bit much to ask. I think that if Saber had just beaten him and killed him in combat fairly, Lancer would have died happy, or at least satisfied. Instead, he died humiliated, thinking that his greatest friend had betrayed him. It isn't pleasant to think about, but the show took a massive step forward in my eyes after Lancer's death, because it proved that it wasn't afraid to show what war is really like. In a show full of tragic characters, Kariya is, in my opinion, Fate Zero's single most tragic character. It's never fun to watch a character go through the hell that Kariya had to endure, but I think the reason his character arc resonates with me so much is because he didn't deserve it. At least, not in the beginning. Things kind of snowballed when he began to go insane. Kariya is a genuinely good, selfless person whose goodness and selflessness ultimately led to physical and psychological suffering beyond belief, because this is the type of setting that Fate Zero takes place in. Aside from being the definition of a tragedy, Kariya's character arc fleshed out many things about the corruption involved with the Mages Association. In a natural and non-expository way, we learn all about how horrible it is to be a child mage in this world, just how evil Zokan is, and how obviously misled Tokiomi's logic is. Kariya did nothing wrong by leaving the Mato family. In fact, he did what most people would do, and walked out of that corrupt hellhole. He had no business in saving Sakura, and no debt to pay, but he tried to give his life for hers anyway because that's the type of man Kariya is. His care for Sakura was so obviously going to land him in trouble, but I couldn't help rooting for him in this war simply because I didn't want such a good guy to have to endure all this pain for no reason. And unfortunately, it was all for nothing. He went through hell and gave his life in order to save a girl and make the only people in this world that he cared about happy. And what did he get? Tons of pain and suffering, an early death, failure in his quest to save Sakura, and the realization that not only is the love of his life crippled and broken, but he was the one that caused her pain. Brutal. What can be said about the mascot for the Fate series and one of the best characters in this show? Well, quite a lot actually. I love Saber. I love her for her naivete and hopelessly narrow-minded ideals, and how flawed of a king she was. Saber's downward spiral of a character arc and deconstruction of a selfless martyr is exactly what inspired me to look at works of fiction beyond the surface, and analyze things a little bit deeper. The slow deterioration of Saber's romantic notions of kingship throughout Fate Zero was fascinating to experience. There are two ways to look at a selfless king like Saber who thrusts herself in danger to protect her people. One way is to look at it in a positive light, how Saber was kind, caring, and supportive of her people, how she put duty above all else, and how righteous she was in putting the people ahead of herself. The second way of looking at Saber's rule is the more realistic and cynical way Ryder describes it, how Saber was not a leader, but a perfect role model that no one could hope to live up to. She babied, protected, and forgave her people so much that she forgot to lead them. Lancelot himself says that he was driven to his insanity through Saber's acceptance and forgiving of his crimes. He didn't want to be forgiven. He had violated a knight's chivalrous code and wanted to atone for his sins. Yet Saber cannot see this because she thinks that forgiveness, protection, and selflessness are what kingship is about. This narrow-minded view led to Lancelot's madness and the complete destruction of her people, and only through the course of the Fourth Holy Grail War does she see through the facade and realize that she didn't lead anyone. Saber was such a good character with some wonderful scenes. Her Excalibur scene is one of the show's big moments, but Saber, like so many characters in Fate Zero, found out way too late that she was simply not cut out for the harsh realities of her narrow-mindedness. It's a brutal and depressing character arc, and Saber's despair at the show's end shows that she now knows her mistakes, yet has no means to rectify them. Ryder is the man. He's the quintessential charismatic war king, a man who inspires, a man who others fear, a man who laughs the loudest and rages the hardest. There's no subtlety to him, and I love it. Ryder thinks that to be a king is to be a man with endless ambition that lives without regrets, who embraces his mistakes and trusts his instincts. According to Ryder, a king should be a person who inspires, who others can emulate through his vibrant way of life. This is in direct contrast to Saber's detachment and path of sorrow only focused with sacrificing herself for her people. The way his ideology of what a true king should be clashed with Saber's in the absolutely amazing Banquet of Kings scene is one of my highlights of the series, and I love how the show doesn't favor one philosophy over the other. It simply lays out the two kings' opinions. Although Ryder essentially scolded Saber for being naive and had plenty of great points, Fate Zero makes it quite clear that Ryder's own philosophy is just as fundamentally flawed as Saber's. I mean, he ultimately led his vassals to their death. I'm no history buff, and I know embarrassingly little about Alexander the Great, so forgive any inaccuracies here, but judging by how the show portrays Ryder, he seems to me like a bit of a tyrant. To me, he's a man that the kingdoms need during wartime for his leadership, his ability to inspire his men, and the way he strikes fear into enemies. However, he doesn't seem to me like he'd be a good king outside of wartime, and I don't think I would want to be under his rule during times of peace. Luckily, Phase Zero isn't about peace, so we get to see Ryder at his absolute best, striving for conquest and adventure, and inspiring others. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention his amazing final battle with Gilgamesh. Good God, that was epic. His reckless abandon and his realization that his heart's desire isn't any physical place, but adventure itself? Just brilliant. This brings me to his master, Waver Velvet. Waver, in essence, is a very simple but well-crafted character. He's just a struggling novice mage at the bottom of the totem pole, trying to prove that individual character and hard work can trump nepotism and the establishment. He doesn't have huge plans for the Grail, he doesn't have hidden motives, he just wants to prove that he's worth a damn, even if he wasn't born into a famous magic family. Waver is one of the characters that develops the most throughout Fate Zero. He starts off as a bitter young mage eager to prove himself and accomplish feats that he can shove in the face of people like Caneth. When we first meet him, he's short-tempered, cowardly, and nursing a giant inferiority complex. Through Ryder's help and praise, he becomes able to recognize his own strengths and reassess his priorities. By the end of the show, he's a changed man. He has realized that reputation is meaningless and peace of mind is all that matters. He grows so much that Gilgamesh spares him out of respect of his loyalty. And I know for a fact that Gilgamesh would have demolished Waver if he had a chance at the beginning of the show. He's pretty much the only character that has changed for the better by the show's events. The Waver-Ryder dynamic is so important to the show's thematic and tonal balance. Their back and forth banter between the two, the lighthearted humor, Waver's determination and Ryder's amazing outlook on life, it all adds to a feel-good relationship between the two. By the end of the show, they're close friends. This positive dynamic is in total contrast with the rest of the show, which can just be so dark and bleak. I firmly believe that without Waver and Ryder, Phase Zero just would have been too grim and too depressing of a show for me to really get too much out of it. These two are just so vital because they add light and a glimmer of hope to a setting and a story that can be overwhelmingly dark. Kirei Kotomine and Kiritsugu Emiya. Two men that on the surface seem almost identical,
They're both mage killers, they both have a cold and emotionless demeanor, and they're both on a seemingly aimless quest. Yet they're almost exact opposites of each other in terms of the motivations behind their behavior. I'll start with the simpler of the two. Kirei Kotomine is a man that has been looking for purpose his entire life and been unable to find it. He feels nothing, no sadness, no happiness. He's empty. Throughout the course of Fate Zero, Kirei, with the help of Gilgamesh, slowly learns who he is and what he enjoys. Through their great dialogue-heavy scenes, Gilgamesh slowly begins peeling back the layers of Kirei's character until both men realize that Kirei is a sadistic psychopath who finds pleasure in pain and destruction. And that's about it when it comes to Kirei. He's not a very complex character, but he is a deep, well-characterized one with tons of development. Now we move on to arguably the most important character of the show, Kiritsugu Emiya. This man is one of my favorite characters ever. He's a walking tragedy, an enigma of a man who's full of contradiction, self-loathing, and regret. The death of his close childhood friend, Shirley, as a result of his father's selfish and foolish research, was an event in Kiritsugu's life that dictated who he would become. Kiritsugu is haunted by Shirley's question about what he wants to become and her confidence in his ability to change the world. He deeply regrets that he didn't kill Shirley when the dead apostle virus was isolated in her blood, and he blames himself for the destruction of his hometown. After this, Natalia takes him in and teaches him about the brutality of the world and how to be an assassin. During his teenage years, Kiritsugu learns that tragedies exactly like the one that occurred on his hometown happen all over the world, and he takes it upon himself to cure the world of this tragedy and bloodshed through killing people he deems as evil. He slowly builds up a philosophy that he builds his life around, a philosophy that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and that the majority of people must survive at all costs, even if it means killing the innocent minority. He thinks this philosophy will save the world. He uses these ideals in the beautifully sad scene where he decides to kill his surrogate mother in order to prevent an outbreak of disease. After being taken in by the Ainsburns, Kiritsugu grows to care for the homunculus called Irisfeel. He teaches her about the outside world, and she eventually grows a personality and begins to care for Kiritsugu. The two ultimately fall in love, but this was a love that brought Kiritsugu as much pain as it brought him joy, because he knew that Irisfeel would cease to exist after the war. They have a daughter, and Kiritsugu feels even more despair, because he knows that his child will lose her mother because of him. However, despite all of this self-loathing, Kiritsugu is determined to win the Grail. He's totally prepared to commit acts of evil in order to save the world, willing to do anything it takes to end violence and war. Kiritsugu's monologue about the pointlessness of war is one of my favorite lines of anything ever.
You heard her, Irie. Our heroic spirit over there considers a battlefield to be better than hell. What a joke. A battlefield is hell itself. There's no hope to be had on one. There is nothing but unspeakable despair. Just a soulless crime we call victory, paid for by the pain of the defeated. But humanity has never recognized this truth. And the reason is that in every era, a dazzling hero has blinded the people with their legends, and kept them from seeing the evil of bloodshed they bring. True human nature has not advanced a step beyond the Stone Age.
Kiritsugu hates himself. He hates the things that he must do, but he carries on because he believes that he can save the world. To cast out all of the world's evil, he must himself become evil, and he despises this. Kiritsugu is not emotionless. He's just so hardened by death that he can commit unspeakable acts without showing remorse, even if he hates himself for it. I say he's a walking contradiction because it's true. He hates evil, yet he does evil. He hates war and violence, yet he kills, all because of his unyielding faith in his ideals. This brings me to the climax of Kiritsugu's character arc, the scene inside the Grail. This metaphorical and symbolically rich climax is brilliant, and so much more effective than the bombastic, stunning, but shallow action scenes that dominate the climax of Unlimited Blade Works. In this scene, we learn that the Grail is tainted, and can only grant a wish by means that the wisher comprehends and understands. Kiritsugu didn't know this. He thought that he would be able to magically stop worldwide bloodshed in a way that he didn't understand. His philosophy of killing the few to save the many was only a means to an end, the end being the Grail. In this scene, however, the Grail tells him that it will grant his wish using his philosophy, but it's all too clear that this philosophy is unsustainable and fundamentally flawed. Here we see a man's entire life's work and ideology being torn to shreds in an abstract but completely effective way. The Grail is a sham. It was pointless. All of it was pointless. Most of Kiritsugu's life was pointless, and it's impossible to stop conflict. This climax is absolutely heart-wrenching, and it offers depth of character and sophisticated storytelling that's much more effective than swinging swords around, at least in this context. Sorry to go off on a tangent about Kiritsugu, but I really believe that he's a character that deserves attention. Anyways, back to the original topic, the Kirei and Kiritsugu dynamic. These two men and their rivalry is so fascinating to watch, because on the surface they seem quite alike, yet the more we learn about them, the more different they are. Kirei loves destruction, Kiritsugu is sickened by it. Kirei was searching for a purpose his whole life, Kiritsugu always had one. Kirei never loved, and Kiritsugu loved so much it pained him. The way these two characters and their respective arcs and themes play off one another is awesome to behold, and is a huge reason that Fate Zero is as deep and thought-provoking as it is.